right. So, welcome to PSU Mac Admins 2024. This is my first time attending and my first time presenting. I'm super excited to be here and talk to you all about something that I'm very passionate about, seeing the Mac used in organizations securely and effectively. My name is Chris. My beautiful wife, 3 kids, and I live in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, which is about an hour and a half east of the Twin Cities in Minnesota and about 15 minutes north of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Chippewa is home of Leinenkugel's Brewery, Jack Dawson, and Seymour Cray, the father of the supercomputer. I was born and raised here, and I also used my first Mac in Chippewa Falls, playing Oregon Trail within the computer lab at Hillcrest Elementary. Hence, a lot of the slide deck theming and a lot of our just branding in general. I love the outdoors, making things with my hands and traveling as much as I can. I don't love public speaking. This is not my idea of like a great time. I'm also one half of Chippewa.io, a very small Apple technology consulting firm, where my brother Tyler and I help organizations navigate their journey with Apple. At Chippewa.io, we specialize in deep custom integrations with Jamf or other MDM solutions, bespoke software and script development, creating innovative new workflows for Mac admins like you all. We are also dedicated to helping organizations enhance the security of their Mac deployments and MDM infrastructure through our hardening processes and custom tools. A little bit about me professionally. I kind of see my professional history before Chippewa.io in 4 stages. I spent time in service desk roles, technical account management, systems management, and leadership. Each prepared me differently for where I am now. I bought my first Mac computer in 2009 and fell in love. I began working for Best Buy shortly after and became the Mac guy. I was the only person who wanted anything to do with Macs, so I had the opportunity to get deeply involved with anything Apple related. My agent badge number was 48737. Are there any other former Geek Squad agents? Yeah. Yeah?
I was there before Geek Squad.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I left Geek Squad to join Jamf in the winter of 2014 as a technical account manager. This role opened up a whole new perspective on Apple technology to me. Instead of just setting up a printer on a Mac for somebody's uncle, I was learning to deploy printers to thousands of Macs all at once. After a couple years as a TAM, I was promoted to technical support engineer, serving as an escalation point within Jamf's technical support organization. I have some of my fondest memories in that role. It's where I feel like I had the most learning experiences of any role I've had. I enjoyed helping customers with all of their complex technical issues and helping them get the goals that they had hoped to achieve. There's a very good chance that I've worked on some of your Jamf instances, especially if you created a support ticket in between the years of about 2014 and 2018-ish. So I've touched hundreds or thousands of different Jamf environments, probably not thousands. Then I accidentally transitioned into management, aiming to enhance the support experience for both Jamf customers and support staff. Although that role has fewer fond memories for me, it really gave me invaluable insight into organizations and into leadership and organizational improvement. I departed Jamf in late 22 to start Chippewa.io in 2023. So, what are we going to talk about today? I'm hoping to take you through a few topics. I've prepared to help everybody understand the gravity that is accessing the Jamf API client side and how to wield that Jamf API responsibly. So what I'm hoping that we have a chance to discuss is what is the big deal? Why can't we interact with Jamf API client side safely through scripts? What about all the methods that people have developed over the years to do this differently? And what improvements Jamf has made over the years to enhance the security around the API and scripting. Then I'll be discussing how I've taken all of that understanding to develop a novel way to interact with the Jamf API that addresses each of the problems we discussed. We'll also discuss its architecture and how it can be replicated if you want in other ways. So before we get started with that planned agenda, I just want to set some expectations and ensure we're aligned on a few things. This presentation is centered around security, and if you simply don't care about security, this presentation probably isn't for you, but you should also look for another job. There are different types of threats. They're each important to plan for and each important to design for. They range from those power users that are just curious about what you're doing on their computers to the brilliant little kids in your high school that make your job harder because they find ways around your tools, or to actual threat actors whose aim is to ransack your IT stack and steal your data. I want to be clear, you must plan for and protect against all of these. I'm also going to be talking a lot about the Jamf Pro API specifically. However, just because I'm using the word Jamf Pro API over and over and over again, please keep in mind that this logic or process can be adapted to any of the MDMs out there, and the logic can be used for just about any API that has sensitive information you need to protect. The intention of the presentation isn't to walk you through step by step how to build the tool specifically, and instead I hope it helps you reframe how you think about accessing sensitive APIs on your enrolled clients. And with what you learn, you should have the understanding to replicate it in some way in your environment. So again, if you're not using Jamf, you're using Adigi or Kanji or whatever, just in your head, swap those out. And lastly, the Jamf Pro API simply wasn't designed for client-side access. It's a powerful and robust tool that was built to allow the Jamf server to communicate with other infrastructure and software within your environment. In its current state, it should be abundantly clear just by looking at it and how it's designed that it simply doesn't have the types of permissions or authentication mechanisms to be used client-side like we often see it used. So, what's the big deal? While I believe most of you recognize the high-value target that Jamf Pro presents to a threat actor, it's crucial to emphasize that significance. So let me clarify why this is so critical. In the same way these MDM tools make your lives as admins easier and allow you to deploy software silently, discreetly, and in a user-friendly way, it also offers all of those same great benefits to threat actors. I originally prepared a set of slides designed to highlight the potential dangers of a Jamf Pro breach. It was some real nasty fire and brimstone stuff. Instead, I'm just going to ask a few questions and ask that you just kind of reflect on them. What could an attacker accomplish in your environment if they had the ability to quickly, silently, and without user interaction, install a package on all of your enrolled clients? And what could they do if they had the ability to run scripts as root? And what could an attacker do if they had the ability to install and configure a network proxy on your enrolled clients? And lastly, how long would it take you to notice that they did any of that if they did it all through the API? So please just reflect on that and understand the gravity that we're dealing with. So that's the big deal. And now as to why scripts are a particular issue. The main reason is very straightforward and simple. It has to do with the fundamental component of scripting, the interpreter. Interpreters, which are defined on the first line of every script within the shebang, are what make the script actually do the things. And interpreters each rely on your script following that interpreter's specific rules, like syntax and formatting. One of those rules that they commonly rely on is plain text, as all scripting languages are inherently human readable. And anyone who has ever pasted a rich text curly quote into a script knows this. Interpreters are very picky. And with that last point, that's the issue. It's plain text. It's a plain text file, and the arguments that we pass it have to be plain text as well, or have to be converted to plain text when executed. So there are some caveats. So I know some of you are probably thinking of scripting languages where what I just said isn't true of. So languages like Python and Java can be compiled into bytecode. However, they can be decompiled relatively easily with available tools like uncompile6. So this isn't something you should rely on as your sole mechanism of security. And again, like Python, it could be packaged into an executable file, which makes it non-human readable. But at that point, I'd argue we're not truly running a script in the same sense that we're particularly concerned with. You can create Python executables with something like PyInstaller, but in my opinion, still, this isn't something you should solely rely on because they can still be relatively easily decompiled with readily available tools publicly. So with that caveat out of the way, I'll just say that the vast majority of scripting in the Mac administration space is some form of shell scripting. So bash, zsh, sh, ksh. I conducted a really informal poll last week, maybe it was the week before, on the Slack community. I had 32 respondents, so by no means is a very scientific test or anything here. But as you can see, and as I'm sure you know yourselves, shell scripting languages are by far the commonly used tool for deploying scripts to Macs. I did also have other choices that didn't get selected. Those were AppleScript, Swift, Perl, PHP, and then I also included PowerShell because I'm open-minded. And like I said, I realize it's not definitive proof, but like I said, I think we all agree that the vast majority of the scripting that goes on in the Mac administration space is shell scripting. And with shell scripting, the interpreters do rely on plain text at execution time. This means that as your script is being executed, its processes and commands become visible to even standard users with a pretty low level of scripting or terminal knowledge. And if you want to see how widespread the issue is, or if you don't believe me, just open up Mac admin Slack and search for these strings. You'll find hundreds of scripts that are accessing the API in plain text scripts, which is something crazy to me. It's surprising how widespread of an issue this is in the community. And I wish it was said more often that it's problematic. So to summarize the big deal and why you can't use scripts, the Jamf Pro server presents an enormous target that should be protected at all costs. Doesn't matter if you're managing a small country day school with iPads or some other small organization, each and every Mac in your environments has something valuable on it that's worth protecting. And we simply can't use plain text scripts client side that access the API directly. It just simply isn't safe. This presentation was at JNUC a few years ago. It's from Callum Hall and Luke Roberts. Definitely recommend giving that a watch. They talk more than just the scripting issue that I'm discussing here, but it's definitely worth a watch and an interesting video if you want to take a look at that. So the other second question, we've literally been doing this for years, right? And you salt and you obfuscate and obscure the credentials. So I want to talk about why this isn't quite enough and why this still isn't safe. So first I want to shout out Bryson, it's actually here, Bryson Tyrell and JVZ at Jamf for getting us to the point we're at today. And to my knowledge, Bryson's encrypted strings GitHub project that you're probably all relatively familiar with was the first to introduce any level of care protecting API credentials within scripts. And I just want to be clear, this was a good first step. And despite the bashing, pun intended, that I'm going to do on obfuscation, It was an important step, and we should appreciate it for what it did for as long as it has. Because obfuscation isn't completely worthless. It does offer at least one degree of protection. And Bryson himself would admit, too, especially when I chatted him. That's what he said in Slack. So in the spirit of getting better and being better, we have to move on from utilizing obfuscation alone, because it is compromising the security that we think we're offering to our organizations and is making the Mac less safe in the enterprise. I think a lot of people use obfuscation, and it must make them feel some comfort in what they're doing. But I'm here to tell you, you should feel no comfort in that. If there were a real threat actor, it is nothing to get around for them. And in the spirit of providing a very accessible presentation, I just want to briefly say obfuscation, it's just a disguise. You're not actually changing data. You're simply disguising data, and it makes it enormously easy to just reverse. So that said, obfuscation, what it can offer is, if you're in a coffee shop and you leave your computer open and someone glances at your screen, an obfuscated password is protected from those quick glances like that. Beyond that, though, if somebody has everything within your script, not even, I'll talk a little bit about later about some techniques to hack, but it doesn't really offer anything beyond just those casual glances. So all of the different methods I've seen in the Jamf Pro servers in my time, like I said, I've seen lots of different Jamf Pro servers. I would put all of the methods, though, up to this point into three categories. It's obfuscation through encoding, obfuscation through symmetrical encryption, or just not, and just literally cowboying the whole thing. One of the tools we utilize when helping customers understand the level of security in their Jamf environments is something we call Dimitri. With Dimitri and access to an enrolled client and only a standard account, we're able to scrape Jamf API tokens, basic auth credentials, or API client secrets to obtain these tokens when utilizing any shell scripting language. It isn't something I want to spend too much time on. If you don't believe what I'm saying, I can show you after the talk how easy it is. But it is extraordinarily easy. So, in summary, the methods we've all seen and used up till today, unless there's one out there I just have missed, and I doubt it, they're all pretty bad. They honestly shouldn't be utilized in any production server, in my opinion. They open up your server in no ways that a Jamf server should be. Yeah. So, but Chris, I only ever do this with a very locked down service account or the new API client feature. So that would be really good. That's honestly the best thing that you can do up till today to protect yourselves. But again, the permissions for the Jamf Pro API were designed for administrators and for server-to-server interactions. They weren't designed to be handled or to be handed to enrolled clients. And they simply aren't granular enough for that purpose. And this is just the first 3 pages of a search I performed against the Jamf product issues channel in Slack. I worked for Jamf many, many years. And just anecdotally speaking, I worked a lot of support cases about how the permissions didn't function the way you would expect them to function. And this continues to be an issue where you check one box thinking it's going to give this user a permission and it doesn't. Or you find that a user has a permission for something you checked and it shouldn't have it, right? So this is just something to keep in mind, and it's just another thing that, like I said, when you're exposing this to clients, that's where you're getting issues. These sorts of PIs and problems aren't as big of a problem when you're giving these credentials and stuff to server-side pieces of software. But when you're giving this to clients, this is just something that simply isn't safe. Chris, Jamf has made improvements over the years. Look at the new client API feature. That solves this, doesn't it? No, it doesn't. Not even close, in my opinion. And again, it's because it was designed for server-to-server interactions. So let's talk about these things. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the various changes in the Jamf API have been, especially around the latest update, and how they are or not of themselves increasing the level of security in your environments. So at the beginning, does anybody know when the Jamf API first rolled out? I couldn't find it in any release notes online. No? It was before version 9. I know it was in version 8. So, but at the beginning, we had basic auth. That's what it sounds like. It's username and password. So if you were writing a script, in your curl, you'd simply have to add a header for your username and password, pass it in, and it would give you back the data. Downside to this authentication method was essentially that you could take that same username and password and just log right into the Jamf Pro server with it. And then obviously perform whatever tasks that account was capable of via the API in the GUI. A quick and dirty script would often just include admin's credentials. I'm pretty sure most people are guilty of this at some point. Just hope we didn't deploy it to clients in that manner. The next evolution in the Jamf API, in my opinion, came in 10.25, along with the debut of the new Jamf Pro API. Gave us that second Jamf Pro API. So this brought bearer token authentication to that second API. The classic API still only used basic auth. And while that was a good step, it's just a baby step because the only way to actually obtain one of those tokens was through basic auth. So you're essentially just using basic auth at that point. There's just one more step. And then obviously you have all the same problems as before. Then in 10.35, they brought that new token authentication method to the classic API. So now both APIs use that token method or can use that token method. Which was great at that point because the new API then had very limited endpoints. It wasn't fully fleshed out. So, and while again it's a baby step, it still isn't where we need it to be for client-side access. And then the most recent evolution is the API clients and API secrets feature. And this is the biggest update, I think, that they've brought out, and it's pretty great. But it's still essentially an account, and it's the only difference is it's incapable of logging into the Jamf Pro server. So it's only able to do anything with the API. One of the cool things that I really applaud Jamf for is that there's no such thing as default permissions with those API clients. You have to make what's called an API role. And when you start doing that, every single box is unchecked instead of every single box being checked, or there being boilerplate options for you to select from. So when creating one of those API roles, you literally have to read through the whole thing and check each box individually that you want. And that's really good. Keeps us from being too lazy. There's a lot of boxes to check. So again, however, it solves nothing for client-side access because it still relies essentially on the same permission levels that you would be giving to a server. So for example, if I want to provide read access to an enrolled client's computer record, I have to give that client read access to every single computer record. I can't do it individually. And same goes for write access. If I want to give a computer write access to an individual computer record, its own, I have to give it write access to every computer record, which creates an enormous attack surface. But again, like critiquing the Jamf API in this way, I don't believe is fully fair because they just simply didn't design it for that. They're designing it for server-to-server interactions. And one other update that Jamf has made that I'd like to applaud, and I can't trace it back to any specific release notes, but at some point they debuted the Jamf.app. So all of your enrolled clients now have a Jamf.app on them, and this app handles a lot of the work that the binary used to. And I can't prove it, but I'm pretty confident. If any of you know, I'm curious, so come talk with me afterwards. But I'm pretty sure that it handles a lot of the script running responsibilities. Before, and again, I don't know when this specifically changed, but before, you could literally just open up the waiting room folder in Finder, and when you ran a script, you could see your script pop right in and then disappear at some point. That's no longer really possible, or at least I haven't seen it in some time. It happens, like if you watch the files get created, it happens, but it's so fast you can't see it. It gets created and it disappears right away, which is cool. But that doesn't stop our Dimitri tool from scraping the tokens or scraping the credentials used. So it's still not enough, in my opinion. It was a great step because it, again, does prevent some of that casual snooping or those power users that are just nosy. But again, it still doesn't provide any real protection because you don't actually need the full body of the script to see what happens with curl in a process list. Skip that. So recap so far. Jamf Pro is a high-value target. You have to protect it. The Jamf APIs can be used to orchestrate sophisticated, fast, and silent attacks. We as a community completely ignore this fact. We've created methods that feel better, but in fact offer no real security. And there have been improvements, but the root of the problem still exists. So hopefully I've convinced you at this point to log into your Jamf servers and get rid of those scripts. Just kidding. Not going to Q&A yet. Okay, so here we are. I think we're probably at the point where most of you have been waiting for. You're curious about how you should be doing this. You've gotten bored about hearing the history or the scary stories I'm trying to tell. So don't worry, I do have a solution for us. So when we first started looking at this problem, we took more than a couple steps backwards, and we just determined a few things that we weren't going to be able to design around, and some things that we needed to improve. The things we couldn't design around or wouldn't design around, the biggest one is scripting. Everybody loves shell scripting. It's fast, it's easy. Most of us don't have time to learn a new language. We're already working under resource challenges. So telling everybody, learn Python and execute your scripts as executable files isn't a good answer, in our opinion. Another thing that we hit early on that we wanted to architect it this way, but there simply was no way. It was the native Jamf certificate authority isn't accessible via the API, which is probably good. But that meant that we would have to do this without the Jamf Pro certificate authority to verify enrolled client statuses and stuff like that, or use it as a communication method. And the Jamf Pro API that we wanted to access is designed for server-to-server interactions, and that's just a truth. We couldn't do anything about that. Some things that we wanted to improve, the current API and Jamf permissions. We didn't want to give every client access to every computer record. We wanted to be more granular than what is currently allowed in the Jamf permission sets. Doing so would allow us to reduce the attack surface significantly. We also wanted a way to ensure that only Jamf enrolled clients could obtain information from the service. Some things we needed to ensure that our enrolled clients could do. So this was kind of our minimal viable product was we wanted computers to be able to access their full computer record. We wanted computers to be able to update their full computer record. And we wanted computers to be able to self-heal the Jamf framework securely and safely. Because the vast majority of the self-heal workflows that you see out there rely on very unsafe authentication mechanisms. And on that, we also wanted to prevent unauthorized machines to utilize that same process for enrolling, meaning we didn't want to use enrollment invitations or Jamf credentials. So how did we do it? We created Gustav. Gustav is the tool that we built to accomplish all those goals. And soon we'll be able to do a few more things. It's the antithesis of Dimitri. But the theory or methods in which we built Gustav can be replicated in other environments with a number of different stacks or tools. It's the method or the thought process that makes it unique and can be built upon. So now we're going to shift and discuss the tool and how it functions on a fundamental level, but not necessarily a technical level, or not too technical. We didn't want to literally dive into how to code this thing. We more so wanted to teach you how to think about it, so you could build your own with the same logic. So today, Gustav is a server we run on Ubuntu. It's fully written in Python, uses Flask, and essentially it hosts a custom REST API. We used Flask. There's a lot of different tools you could use. If you're familiar with Python, you can use Django or a number of other things. There's also a reverse proxy in front of it to ensure that all of the data in transit is encrypted using SSL. And we use a MySQL database to store secrets, profiles, expiration dates, etc. On the client side, we have a small, lightweight binary that is responsible for communicating with the Gustav server. This allows us to obfuscate some of our API endpoints and protect against some of the same vulnerabilities that are presented when you interact with the Jamf API using curl. And of course, you need to have a Jamf server. So to discuss this practical use, we'll just walk through the flow that you need to take as an admin to utilize it. So let's pretend you're an admin. You have a script that you need to write that reads computer records and then updates computer records. It's relatively simple. You essentially replace your curl statements with Gustav commands. So first you have to generate a secret, and Gustav secret generate is the syntax for that. And when you run that, it's simple. The binary checks its local SQLite database to see if there's a pre-existing secret. If there isn't, then it requests one from the Gustav server by sending its unique identifier to the server. The server then checks its database to see if there's an existing secret. If there isn't, the Gustav server reaches out to Jamf Pro using the unique identifier that the client provided. If there is a computer record in Jamf Pro that matches that unique identifier and is a member of a smart group, which allows us to do some conditional access. So if that is true, it responds back to the Gustav server, which at that point, the Gustav server tells the Jamf Pro server, cool, create a configuration profile with this secret and scope it to the computer with that unique identifier. At which point Jamf creates that configuration profile, scopes it to the computer. And that, I think, is the best part of all of this. It's what makes this the safest thing. It makes it novel. We call it managed device asynchronous token delivery. Essentially, Gustav never actually delivers its own tokens. And that's because we wanted a way to ensure that each computer could only ever access its own records. So, like for example, if Johnny's computer, say Johnny figured out what Kyle's UDID is, right? And Johnny's like, I want to get his token so that I can read his computer record. So Johnny gets smart, grabs his UDID, tries to send it to Gustav with his computer. What happens is The Gustav server sees the request, and it sends it to his computer. It never actually sends it to Johnny, so it prevents mixing up any computer records. So now the client has its secret in hand. Now, I missed a slide. No. So now what happens is in your script, you send your unique identifier with your new secret that Jamf Pro delivered to your system. And now your script will just have Gustav computer details is the syntax. And at that point, it reaches out to the Gustav server with that secret and the profile. And then Gustav checks its MySQL database to see, hey, this computer just requested data. Is that computer enrolled in everything still? And is that computer secret that was issued match when I sent it to Jamf Pro? And if it is, then the hold on. Yeah. Backing up. I skipped over a couple things that are important. Okay, so we're still requesting the token. Because I'm sure a couple of you are thinking to yourselves, you send a unique configuration profile to every single computer. Yes, we are. But there's a couple things I want to touch on there that make that not quite as disgusting as it sounds. So when Gustav receives the secret from Jamf Pro, what happens is that it tells the Gustav server that the secret has been received. Once the secret's been received, the client stores it in its SQLite database. Then, after it's stored in the SQLite database, it tells the Gustav server, hey, we're good, I got my secret. At which point, the Gustav server tells Jamf to unscope that profile. And that happens relatively quick, usually about 3 to 5 seconds. Obviously, it'll depend on your MDM command queue. So if that's backed up, this will take longer. Once the profile has been unscoped, there's a new thread that gets started on the Gustav server to delete that profile about 10 minutes later. That's a configurable number. But essentially, the profile lives on the client for a matter of seconds, and then it lives on the Jamf Pro server for about 10 minutes. Again, it's a configurable number. A note on the secrets, because we're greatly reducing the attack surface, and because one of these secrets only allows an enrolled client to ever access its own computer data, we recommend providing really long extended expirations on this token. You don't need more profiles generating in Jamf Pro. MDM commands are always something that are kind of finicky, so we just recommend having really long expirations on these. And it should be safe because, again, that secret's only ever usable for its own computer record. Okay, so we have our secret. So we have our secret. Now in your script, you've generated a secret. You'd run Gustav computer details. And what happens now is the computer sends its unique identifier along with the secret it's obtained. Gustav verifies that the secret is not expired, verifies that the secret and the unique identifier match so that we don't have a computer sending a secret with a mismatched computer UDID. If that's true, the Gustav server then requests to Jamf Pro the computer record. And it gets a full JSON computer record. Once Gustav receives it, Gustav sends that to the client. Here you go, here's the computer record, and then out spits the JSON of the computer record. At which point, you'll have to, manipulate in whatever way or parse down what pieces of that you needed in your script. So now let's say you want to update something in that JSON data. At the current moment, we only update extension attribute values. We don't update other pieces of the computer record, but it's something we're going to do soon. The syntax for that's pretty simple. It's just Gustav update computer, EA, and then the ID for the extension attribute that you want to update, and the value that you want that extension attribute to have. At which point, Gustav sends the unique identifier, the secret, over to the Gustav server. Gustav does its verifications, and if everything matches, everything's safe, then what happens is the Gustav server sends that over to Jamf Pro and updates the computer record. Now let's say you want to have a self-heal process, but you're afraid of sending an open enrollment invitation or credentials to authenticate because you're a smart admin and you came to our presentation here. You also don't want to send API credentials to utilize the MDM endpoint to self-heal. So the syntax, simply Gustav self-heal. And what happens is the Gustav binary sends over unique identifier and secret over to the Gustav server, matches, make sure everything's safe, at which point the Gustav server initiates a connection with Jamf Pro and uses the MDM endpoint, which is relatively new, which essentially causes the Apple push notification stuff that's used during like DEP enrollment to come down and redeploy the Jamf framework safely. So Jamf Pro, like I said, sending install application over to client, receives application framework, reinstalls the Jamf framework, restoring communication with Jamf Pro. A couple other things that you can have with this sort of relay server is kind of cool. I used to, when I was a TAM at Jamf, all my accounts were East Coast commercial, and 95% of them were in the Washington, D.C. area. And we're very concerned with security. And many of them would disable the Jamf Pro API interface. But that would cause issues, especially if they needed to use the API for anything particular. So oftentimes what they would do is just disable it on their externally facing servers. But with using a method like this, what you can accomplish is having the Jamf Pro server in your DMZ, having that disabled, at which point it tells your clients to do the things, right? And your enrolled client communicates to Gustav, which can then pipe into the internal Jamf server where the API is enabled. All of that action happens and then gets funneled back through Gustav to the client, achieving safe and secure API access, all while having your Jamf Pro API fully disabled in the DMZ. And like I said at the beginning, don't necessarily think about this solely in terms of the Jamf API. Gustav, or a thing that you build like it, can be reproduced or repurposed to access other APIs that have sensitive data that you can't just expose to clients. So you could use this in a manner where Jamf Pro tells the client run a script talks to Gustav, and then Gustav, or whatever third thing that you guys build someday, can then talk to like an Okta API or some other API that you may need access to that has sensitive data that you don't want to willy-nilly hand over to enrolled clients. So things that are currently on the roadmap, things that we want to build in. We want to use an MDM message instead of a configuration profile. We think this will work. We're still playing around with that, but it should fully remove the clutter that would happen in your Jamf Pro server. Even though we take care to make sure that everything is short-lived and it's only in there for 10 minutes, it would be better to just not be there at all. So another thing we want to do is pre-parse that big computer record. We want to be able to basically, instead of just saying computer details, computer user location, and it'll give you just that section of the computer record, or it'll pre-parse it for you. So you don't have to handle all that parsing. It just makes your script writing a lot easier. And something we really, really want to build that some organizations have done that usually don't do it safely is having an application on client devices that your end users can open up and basically see their computer record in Jamf Pro, right? It gives a lot of transparency. So organizations that care about having transparency with their end users, want their end users to see what sort of things you're collecting on their computer record, right? Maybe we'll build it so that they can see what sort of policies you have deployed and explanations of what the policies do. So it just kind of gives, like I said, more transparency and visibility for organizations that care about that sort of thing. We also want to build in some specific syntax for updating GSX purchasing data, because it's easier to determine like warranty expiration date on the client itself than it is in mass from the Jamf server. We also want to make it so you can update any part of the computer record and open it up to other MDM platforms. And something we've toyed with is having like a danger mode where instead of giving you a computer record, it gives you a actual token to access the Jamf API. So in the event that you need to access a piece of the Jamf API that is not the computer record or some other thing. This scares us, to be honest, though, because this would fully be susceptible to all of the same problems that we discussed earlier in the session. So its token would have to be extremely short-lived, something like 3 seconds or 5 seconds or something. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking or wondering, is it open source? It's not, but it is free for the vast majority of you. There are certain things within our process or tool that we want to protect, consider proprietary. We believe that this adds to the solution's overall security, albeit only a small amount. But it is completely free for any educational institution, which is most of you. We want to be transparent about a couple things in our project and how the tool works. So any organization that wants to use it, wants to see the source code, we would gladly share that under NDAs. Someday we make it truly open source, we're thinking. But there's a few things that we want to carve out to keep it a little bit obscure. So this QR code takes you to our website where you can sign up for a list. We don't have our delivery mechanisms. Like I said earlier, Chippewa.io is my brother and myself. It's literally just the two of us, so we wear every hat in the org. So managing the website and how we're going to deliver this tool is still something that we're working on, but we should have it done in the next week or two. So in August for sure, it'll be available. So that QR code, also I've got business cards up here if you want to grab one of those. They've got the same QR code on it. And then that will allow you to access the tool. But I'm not necessarily, I think that all of you have the means and capabilities to build something very similar to this. You don't have to be fluent in Python to build a system like this. You don't have to be fluent in server development at all to build a tool like this. Many of you have Okta workflows or like Zapier, stuff like that. You could build something just like this in one of those tools. The tool itself is relatively simple. The logic or ideas you need to follow, I think, are these. API access and the data behind the API are two different things. You do not need to have one to get the other. You can give clients the data behind the API without giving them direct access to the API itself. And whatever thing that you build out to handle this, you need to make sure verifies whether or not clients are enrolled before communicating. You need to verify whether or not that client is in a safe posture to communicate such data. And you have to protect that third thing. Because again, like if the Gustav server were ever breached, then you're in the same problem as if a client was, right? So protection of that thing, whatever that thing ends up being in your case, is of the utmost importance. Just ideas throwing out there for you to help you build something similar. You could do a full server like we did. You could use Docker containers. Low-code, no-code platforms could be used for something like this. Zapier, Active Pieces, Okta workflows. There's lots of those out there. You could do serverless. You could build this with Lambdas or Cloud Functions or Azure Functions. There's certainly lots of different ways you could do this with the tools you have available and the knowledge that you have today. Keep it simple. The client wants the data, it doesn't want access to the API. Don't give it access to the API. Always make sure that when you're giving the data out, that it's in a good spot to give the data out. And then, again, never access the Jamf API client side. It's not safe. I want to give some thank yous. My wife and family have been supportive of this whole crazy idea to start a consulting firm. And then my little brother for doing it with me. Sam Fortuna, if any of you know him at Jamf, he helped just be kind of a sounding board for me and talk about this whole project conceptually early on. Alec Quinn, Brianne at Jamf, the developer relations team, helped me get some resources to build the tool. And Joel Rennick and Charles Edge really helped with some encouragement and helped me talk through a lot of the practical implications of doing something like this in terms of like the business side and standing a project like this up. And Greg Mackey for some much needed encouragement too through the whole process. So, questions? I wanted to leave a good amount of time, but looks like, yeah, here.
Really,
Ready?
gosh, I have coffee and water right here. Okay.
Here, I'll throw it on the floor, right? There you go.
As someone who is brand new to this process but incredibly interested, where would you suggest you just start? Because it's like kind of overwhelming a little bit.
Sure.
And I'm kind of curious, like, where would you start?
Well, I think I'd maybe say, where are you? Like the API in general is new to you, or?
I'm relatively new to really even, so I've been using Jamf for years.
Yep.
And, but I'm just now diving deeper into like being able to develop more workflows.
Sure.
And so I'm really relatively new, and I have resources to help me learn really the basics, but I just don't know necessarily where to, kind of hone in on the beginning.
I would, if I was you, really understand how to interact with APIs. That's probably the first thing that I would say. So try to, Postman is a good GUI tool that you can use to do a lot of the stuff that you would write in a script to curl. So understanding curl is, like, curl's the binary that 9 times out of 10 anyone's going to use in a script to interact with a binary. So understanding curl and how to use that. Like I said, Postman's a tool with a nice GUI to kind of help you understand how to form API requests, and kind of doesn't walk you through it, but it helps you understand the pieces that you need to form an API request to be successful and things like that. So probably look at Postman. I don't know. Has anybody else got any good suggestions for things to start with to learn?
I want to say Mac admin.
Yeah. You want to throw him the?
Yeah.
It's empty.
Oh, that was close.
I want to say at Mac Admins either 2018 or 2019, there was a very good talk about using the Jamf API from the command line. So that would be a great place to get started.
And it has stayed relatively static too, I would say. So like even if you find a resource that's like 5 years old, like the Jamf API has gone through some changes, but for the most part, it's relatively the same as it was like 10 years ago. So don't be afraid to use an old resource.
So shameless plug, if you're working in Python,
Yeah,
we wrote an SDK for the Jamf API.
I wished you had
Takes
started
care
that 6 months sooner.
Migrate.
Yeah.
In addition to that, no one specifically said that if you go to your Jamf instance /API.
Oh, yeah.
You have access to all the things the API can do. It gives you example scripts that include that, which the curl commands, so you can,
That's on the development portal.
that's on the,
The Swagger docs off the instance don't have the examples, they have mock data. The development portal has the,
Yeah, I broke my own rule. Your instance at /API will have the Swagger docs, which lets you do the try it out after you authenticate. The Jamf developer portal will have scripting examples with the API endpoints because it's its own rendered version of those docs.
Yeah, so what he's talking about here, if you go to your Jamf instance
we're just
slash.
seeing your desktop.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hang on. Okay, there you go. So if you go to /API and then your instance, you'll get to this page, at which point you can click view. And it'll give you like the endpoints that you can use, and it'll give you examples, and you can click try it out, and hit execute. Like it'll actually run these things against your server, and it'll give you sample code that you can literally copy and paste with some of them. I think most of the gets do a copy paste when you do a try it out. Like it'll give you the example.
I think if you hit execute, it gives
Execute.
it.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
you-
yeah, right here.
Yeah.
So like it'll give you the full curl command that it uses to obtain the data. I didn't authenticate, so that's why it's erroring, but that's pretty useful. And then what Bryson was talking about is just developer.jamf.com. It has a lot of really good reference.
If you go to just /API, it gives you the screen with documentation.
Yeah, same link. Yeah. But then here it documents each endpoint. Gives you more specific details about each endpoint.
So what I was going to suggest was with that data on your machine locally, just start playing with any of the get stuff because all the get is just getting information. It's non-destructive,
Yeah.
and you can learn about it and play. And the more playing, the more you learn.
Yeah, I'm really just looking forward to like really getting in and just starting to play with it and learn it like hands-on. And I fortunately have a lot of software developers that I can lean on, like with generic API stuff.
Sure.
That I have questions with, so this has been really helpful, like a lot of really great resources you've shared, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Good, good. What else? Who else has questions?
So with you creating all of the profiles, I'm jumping all the way to the other end of from that question. But,
Yep.
With creating all of those profiles, have you thought about scalability when you have instances of Jamf Pro that are dealing with tens of thousands of devices?
Yeah, one of the things that we want to build in is a check on the Gustav server to see what the MDM command queue is like at the moment, and then not push more stuff if it's like really backed up. Because, you know, as I'm sure most of you know, like that has a tendency to get backed up sometimes if somebody clicks the wrong button or accidentally sends a profile to everybody, right? So we do want to check for that. And then like I said, we want to use an MDM message instead of a configuration profile in the future. And we think that that'll work. I'm not positive yet though. And that won't help the MDM command queue in general, because like that's still going to be an MDM command that needs to go out. But in terms of scalability on the Jamf side, like we're just sending one MD. So there is a profile that needs to live on everybody's computer that tells the Gustav binary where the Gustav server is. So there's one profile there. But then other than that, there should be one profile. And like 6 months, I think, is probably a decent, I don't know, yeah, there's nothing on there anyway. 6 months is like a decent token life for a client, for a Gustav token. Again, because that one token can only really ever be used to access that one computer's record. It can't be used to access anything else. So letting that live for a long time means you don't have to keep sending out profiles. Once it's deployed, you're good for like 6 months.
Yeah, it's just a classic problem of once you start doing it, then everything's going to have the same or close to the same renewal time too. So spacing that out could.
Yeah, yep. We do have like a stagger already in there, so it should prevent it, but it only staggers by like a day, I think. So you'd have everybody doing it within a handful of days. Anybody else? Cool. Well, thank you all for